Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the gender equality training. Great to see everyone. I'll just give everyone a minute or two to join the session. I see lots of you coming in at the moment. Get your audio sorted, etc. And then we'll get started in 30 seconds or so, depending on turn up. So feel free to reintroduce yourselves in the chat again if you'd like to. Um, Share anything that you found particularly interesting or you might have taken action on in your organizations. I know it's only been one day, but maybe there was some follow-up conversations. And otherwise, we'll give it another few seconds before we kick off properly. Oh, I was waiting for us. Oh, we just tipped over 100. I think that's a good point to start on. So great to have so many of you joining us again. So let's get started. So welcome back, everyone, and welcome to today's second part of the gender equality training. So we're following up as we have from our session yesterday, where we started with some of the core concepts, and now we're going to dive into a bit more detail in follow up to that today. So we've got a packed schedule again, so we'll get started and make sure that you have the resources. So thank you again to the Athens Exchange Group for hosting us today. I see Lillian's there again in the chat. Welcome again, Lillian. Great to have you with us again. So it's a really collaborative effort, this training programme, and we thank UN Women, IFC, Colombia and Luxembourg government for their support for this programme. So for anyone who missed part one yesterday, you'll be able to find the recording of it later this week on the SSE event page for this session. So we're going to share the link to that page a couple of times in the chat throughout the training. You can also look there to find the handouts from today's training and from yesterday's training and our guest speakers as well. So be sure to check out there for those recordings later on in the week. So just a few housekeeping points to cover off again, same as yesterday again. So as before, everyone is on mute, but please do use the chat and the Q&A function to engage with us throughout the session. So please share any comments or suggestions or thoughts you may have in the chat and share any Q&A or particular questions for us in the Q&A box. The best thing about that is that enables us to track all the questions we're getting and to directly write our answer to your question. You can also use the Q&A function anonymously. So if you prefer to ask your question anonymously, please don't be shy and feel free to ask us a question that way as well. And again, as per our session yesterday, this will all hopefully be quite familiar, but we'll be doing a live 2-hour session. We will have opportunities for you to participate again throughout the session. And you'll be pleased to know that after the end of this training session is when you'll be eligible to receive your completion certificate. So we'll give you the instructions for how you can get that at the end of the session, but it involves completing our feedback survey, which we're going to share with you at the end. So just to introduce the speakers who we have joining us for today's training. So we have myself and Landon again joining from the UN SSE team. We're joined again by our colleague Maya from UN Women, the Women's Empowerment Principles Secretariat. And then we have two further guest speakers joining us live today. So we have Paul Shaheen from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, who's going to be speaking to us about gender bonds. And we also have a second guest speaker, David Pritchett, joining us from the EDGE Certified Foundation, who provide a gender certification scheme, which David will be telling us more about later. So as a reminder, this course has got 4 modules which have been developed to walk you through the 4 steps for improving gender equality performance for global markets. And today we're going to be focusing on the second 2 steps, which are implement and communicate. And so this is building off what we learned last lesson. So hopefully you were able to join us for that session, but obviously feel free to catch up on that afterwards if you happen to have missed that. So an important note to remind you of here is that this is, of course, an ongoing process. So once you've started communicating on your gender equality performance, this doesn't mean you're done. This is like many sustainability related topics, which are constantly a process of improvement. And so while we present these steps in order, in reality, of course, you're likely to be working on all of these 4 areas at the same time. So there are 2 main objectives from our training today, which we're hoping you'll be able to achieve after our 2 hours together. Firstly, we want to help you to understand how to capture market value for gender equality performance, be that through gender smart investment strategies or through the creation of gender focused financial products. And secondly, we'd like to help you today to communicate gender-related information with internal stakeholders for effective communication and to identify the guidelines that you can use for communicating gender-related information with external stakeholders. So to know what information investors and other external stakeholders are looking for in your corporate reports. And so to achieve these objectives, we've planned about 45 minutes for each of the 2 units we're going to be covering today. We'll take a short 5-minute break in the middle again, and we'll have some resources and opportunities, as I say, to ask questions throughout. So to kick us off again, we're going to take another trip into Menti as we did last session. So that link should be coming through to you in the chat, and it has just now, I think, from Landon. So if you can navigate to Menti using that link that Landon has just shared, we'd like to get a sense to start things off on how much you know already about gender lens investments and disclosures. So I will share the Menti screen now just so that we can see those questions together. So we have the 3 different areas that we're looking to cover today. So let us know how you currently feel about your comfort and understanding on the value that gender equality can add to investment strategies, on communicating gender-related information to investors, and explaining to colleagues the financial value of gender equality. Just give you all another few minutes to find Menti and to put your answers in. If you're having any trouble following the link that Landon gave you, you can also go to menti.com and enter that code at the top of the screen there as well to access the questions. Okay, great. Thanks everyone who's taken part. I see a few more of you, but I'll just leave that going. If you just look at the chat, Puyi Lao, you'll be able to see the link, just a few messages back from Landon. Okay, so I think relative to how we were scoring yesterday, maybe we're kind of a little bit more middling in our understanding of these topics at the moment. So perhaps a little bit of a lesser knowledge base, which is absolutely fine, of course. So we'll see if we can help build that out today. And then just a test, if we were listening yesterday, if we go into concepts, we've got one second question just to ask you to get a bit of a reminder from yesterday. So everyone who is in the Menti should appear as a little icon there. So I can see a few more people joining us for the quiz. Well, I wait until we have one more person. So if we get to 80, there we go. Great, okay. So let's kick off with the question. So is the objective of this program gender equity or equality? Let's see what your answers are. Got a couple more seconds to get those answers in. I see most of you have responded now. Okay, let's see what the result came out as. Alrighty, so we had around 2/3 of you with the correct answer of equality and around 1/3 going for equity, which It's not the right answer, but obviously it's quite a similar word, so that's totally understandable. So we're going to have a little bit of a look and a reminder on that key concept now of the kind of objective in terms of equality. So I'll take us back into the presentation, but please keep that Menti open in the background and we'll revisit that later in the session. So as we said there, the answer to that question was equality. So as a quick reminder, what does equality mean? So you should hopefully remember this diagram that we looked at yesterday. And as a reminder of what we discussed, here's how this plays out in the boardroom. So here we have diversity being around ensuring that multiple identities are represented, and this can include sex, gender, culture, race, ethnicity, religion, age, disability, and more. So representing all of those different aspects of identity. So we liken this to diversity being around having that seat in the boardroom. And equity here is about recognizing and reorganizing power distribution. So equity is being able to speak. So think of it as having a microphone and providing it to those who might perhaps be quiet. And lastly, there we have ensuring inclusion. So this is around ensuring that everyone feels welcome. They can be given that equal opportunity to connect, to belong and grow, to contribute to the organization. So we can say that inclusion is like having an interpretation or a headset that allows everyone to understand each other and to feel welcome. So if diversity is around counting the people and who's there, inclusion is about making those people count in their presence. So that's just a quick recap on that concept from last time. So equity is certainly a very important part of this equation, but the overall formula that we're looking to get here is equality, which is made up of these three aspects. Okay, so just to recap a couple more things we talked about yesterday. So last time we focused on two key areas, which was around preparation, where we set out the groundwork for understanding key terminology, the business case and the human rights case. And we looked at how the world is doing so far in terms of gender equality in corporate leadership. So as a reminder, we learnt that improving gender equality provides many benefits to society and the economy beyond the boardroom or the corporate environment. For example, we saw that studies have shown that gender equality can decrease violence in society, it can increase economic productivity, and it can also increase resilience against financial and environmental crises. Now, just as a reminder, what we did not say was that women themselves drive all of these benefits. It's important to remember that it's the equality part that has that impact. And let's also remember that increasing equality in corporate leadership has also been found to create important benefits, such as increasing profits, increasing transparency, and potentially improving environmental impacts as well. And we also learned yesterday about the UN Women's Empowerment Principles and shared with you how you can use these principles to get started on enhancing gender equality. And as a reminder, that seventh principle on measurement and reporting was highlighted as one of the key principles. And so we're going to be discussing more about that today with Maya and thinking about how to get started with public disclosures. But remember that there is more information to be found in the WEPs on this, and Maya will be sharing some more tools to help you with that later. And a final reminder, since we didn't have as much time to cover this before, of the action points that you can take. So we came to this slide after the activity that we ran through yesterday regarding those two different companies, those fictitious ones of Owl Inc. and Peacock PLC. And as a reminder, we found that corporate culture played an important role in those examples in making sure that we're setting ourselves up for success. So however good the intentions, if we don't take into consideration the corporate culture and the barriers that can prevent improved equality, we won't achieve our objectives and we may waste money or even make the situation worse. And a few actions that we'd flag here would include particularly providing gender sensitivity training for HR staff and managers to ensure fairer recruitment processes and enhancing that diversity aspect, the chair. You could also look at instigating policies aimed to provide equal opportunities for advancement, and those enhance equity for employees, so the microphone. and doing research to identify those barriers, such as external gender pay gap reports or the task force example that we heard about in yesterday's case studies. And that really helps to enhance inclusion or the headset. And so, of course, this all requires effective communication from the top to institutionalize this desired corporate culture. Great. So that's just to give us a little bit of a recap on some of those key concepts. I know it was only yesterday we were talking about them, but we know there's lots of content as well. But with that, we're going to be transitioning now into our third unit, which looks at gender lens finance and the market mechanisms that can support the principles we discussed yesterday. So for that segment, I'm going to be handing over to Landon.
Great, thanks, Fiona, and good afternoon, everyone. So when looking at implementation of gender equality, we'll talk a bit about products that support market action, and we'll also look at some mechanisms that add value and promote gender equality in markets. So let's first look at how financial products are being used to support gender equality and what opportunities lie within those financing mechanisms for gender-allied companies. So to get started, let's look at the trends we're seeing in sustainable finance more broadly. So this chart you see on your screen now, which you can find in the last UNCTAD World Investment Report, shows that in 2022, the total number of sustainability-themed bonds worldwide increased, although you see the rate of growth slowed from 2021, but the total now stands at about 7,000 funds, up 18% from 2021, and those funds are worth about 2.5 trillion USD. Now, you will see in 2022 a slight decrease in global net investment flows to sustainable funds, but it's important to also note that this decline was a result of depressed asset values and investor withdrawals amid persistent market uncertainties, such as high inflation, rising interest rates, poor market returns, and the looming risk of a recession, which you might remember. So as such, this growing trend of sustainable investing is still set to continue to increase, and we're also seeing significant growth in gender lens investing. However, the data on gender lens investing is much more difficult to measure, and we have less clear of an idea of the exact magnitude of funds that consider gender lens factors. Well, we don't have enough time today to dive into this topic. We have provided you with some extra slides in your handout on this, which has been linked already. So if this is something you wish to look into a bit more, please review the handout slides after today's workshop. Now, I just mentioned gender lens investing, so you might be asking yourself, what is gender lens investing? So with that, I'm going to ask you to please share what you think that is in the chat. So what do you think is gender lens investing? If you have a definition off the top of your head, feel free to share it. Or if you just have a few words or even a couple keywords, maybe some terms or what have you, when you think of gender lens investing. We'd love to hear that in the chat. Okay, a couple answers coming in, focused and targeted. Rohit notes companies focusing on gender diversity as an important parameter. Okay. Investing that includes gender in the assessment criteria. Okay, great. Gender mainstreamed, gender-based, promote gender equality. Okay, great. So some really great answers coming in there. So thank you everyone for participating. And we'll look at the official definition now. So the Global Impact Investing Network defines gender lens investing as investment strategies applied to an allocation or the entirety of an investment portfolio which seek to examine gender dynamics to better inform investment decisions and or intentionally and measurably address gender disparities. So I think a lot of folks we're getting that right. I think a lot of the definitions and keywords you mentioned are there. So as the name gender lens investing makes clear, gender is a lens, so a way of seeing that helps an investor to highlight opportunity, illuminate risk, and understand strategy in a more nuanced way. So you might ask, how are investors using that gender lens to make investment decisions? Well, there are many different strategies. So some of the core strategies we see look at specifically at what focus an investment strategy with a gender lens takes. But often we'll see a combination of multiple or all of these strategies to varying degrees. The most common strategy you might be familiar with is a focus on leadership, but other areas that we see investment strategies focusing on are employees, supply chains, products and services, and community. So at the firm level, fund managers can drive the adoption of gender lens or gender smart investing by starting within their own investment house. Fund managers could strengthen the gender diversity of their own teams, for example, by the leadership setting clear targets or building a respectful workplace culture or making public commitments to gender diversity. The IFC has developed a framework that we link in the slide that includes designing a gender smart investment strategy, engaging, training, and rewarding people within the firm, enhancing or adapting investment processes and systems, and identifying and collaborating with partners and external stakeholders at the firm level. Now, at the portfolio level, fund managers can adopt strategies in both origination and portfolio management. These strategies enable fund managers to allocate capital to companies that are committed to these five key areas on your screen. Oh, sorry, I went one ahead. So, women's representation and leadership as founders, co-founders, and senior management, a gender diverse and equitable workforce, a gender inclusive value chain, offering and designing products or services that consider the distinct needs of women, and ensuring their operations do no harm to women in the community. So the good news is that as the benefits of gender diversity have become more widely recognized, investor demand for gender smart investment opportunities has increased considerably. This has led to the emergence of a variety of gender-focused financial products across asset classes. To give a brief overview of the investment universe, let's take a look here on this slide at how investment can be channeled towards gender equality and gender smart investments. On the left-hand side, we can see that there's a few buckets in terms of the financial products that can be used to direct financial flows towards gender equality. That includes equity-based financial products, debt or fixed income financial products, and also funds, which can either be debt or equity-based. And on the right-hand side, we see that the investors accessing these financial products also vary, and we're seeing both retail or individual investors, as well as institutional investors, for example, making use of the financing vehicles. This is important to note because investors have different needs and expectations, which leads to a diversity of products as well to meet those different needs. Now let's take a look at what this looks like in practice by diving a bit more into some case studies that can shed some light onto what this really looks like. So this first example builds on what we discussed yesterday about how climate and gender benefits can coexist. This example comes from Gold Standard, which is an organization that was established in 2003 by WWF and other international NGOs to ensure projects reduce carbon emissions, featuring the highest levels of environmental integrity and also contribute to sustainable development. This specific case study looks at the Longo Safe Water Project in Uganda. The Longo Safe Water Project received the first ever gold standard gender responsive certification in 2020. The project rehabilitates boreholes to provide clean water in rural Uganda, and as of August 2023, credits are available to purchase on the gold standard marketplace, offering purchasers the option to choose carbon credits from a project which has been rigorously assessed to reduce gender inequality. So the climate and social impact of this project includes 50,000 tons of CO2 emissions reductions per year, 40,000 individuals enjoying clean water access, reducing incidences of waterborne illness. On gender, 4 hours gained per week per household, and reduced school absenteeism. And if we look even further into the gender equality impact, the project also reports that the local water resource committees is approaching parity with 46% female to 54% male representation. Reported incidences of domestic violence or gender-based violence related to water collection have dropped to zero compared to 35% prior to the project starting, and 100% of the surveyed water users spend the time saved on domestic work as well as income generating and/or social leisure activities. It's also important to note that gold standard when certifying projects for carbon credits have two levels of gender analysis. One is mandatory and one is voluntary. From the mandatory side, all projects must achieve a gender sensitivity status. In addition, they have the option of becoming gender responsive, which requires a deeper analysis and setting gender-related goals and targets. So due to time, we'll skip this next case study, but you can read about the next case studies in the slides that you can, of course, download as mentioned. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Fiona.
Great, thanks, Landon. And as I've shared in the chat, we definitely recommend looking at the IFC's Banking on Women resources as well, which one of the case studies in the handout there relates to. So you can look at that offline as well. But let's have a little bit of a deeper look now at this type of bond, a gender equality bond, and what that can mean. So what exactly are gender bonds? So to get us started, I want to introduce broadly where the focus of these bonds sit, but we're very lucky to have Paul joining us from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, who's going to give us much more detail on this in a moment. So I'm just going to cover the basics here. But as you can see, gender-focused bonds are a subset of bonds within the green, social, and sustainability bond universe. So gender bonds are often not seen as a category of bonds themselves yet, like we do see with green bonds. But increasingly, we're seeing bonds have a gender focus, either by setting distinct KPIs related to gender or linked to projects that support or enhance gender equality. And what I want to highlight here is that we can see also a distinct overlapping with green bonds for climate and gender co-benefit. And so we heard about that a bit in the case study that Landon just shared from the gold standard. In terms of growth, if we take a look at the debt markets, we can see here that there's been a significant increase in sustainable environment finance through social bonds. And this data here is taken from the UNCTAD World Investment Report, and it shows that global issuance of sustainable bonds surpassed $1 trillion in 2018. Apologies, 2021, it passed that point. And although we can see declines in 2022 related to the same trends that Landon mentioned before, it's clear that social and mixed sustainability bonds remain on a long-term growth trajectory. And there's ultimately been nearly a 14-fold increase in annual issuance from 2017 to 2022. So whilst we potentially might already be familiar with green bonds, it's important to notice that specifically since 2020, we've seen a significant growth in social bonds and mixed sustainability bonds. And these are bonds which can include gender-related objectives. And there are a number of guidelines that can help us to determine what qualifies as a gender bond. Importantly, these guidelines are useful whether you're an issuer of such a bond or an investor looking to invest in bonds that contribute to real gender equality impacts. And so you can see two examples here on the screen, the social bond principles, and those give guidelines for issuing social bonds, and then the climate bonds initiative methodology on assessing whether a bond includes social and sustainability aspects as well. So what we think is most important about these guidelines is that they're helping to build trust in the market and ensure that social bonds are designed to achieve their intended positive outcomes. So it's not enough to just call something a gender-focused bond. We need to really understand that the intended impact is happening, and whether it's being achieved. So that just gives us a brief introduction to this topic, but let's now look at it in a bit more in practice. And we have a guest speaker today that we're pleased to have joining us, Paul Shaheen from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. So many thanks for joining us today, Paul. I'll hand over to you to present from here, but if you'd like me to share your video, do let me know.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Fiona, and thank you, Landon, UNSSE colleagues, for inviting us again for this very interesting session on gender equality. I'm very glad that I will speak to you today about gender-focused bonds. So my name is Paul, and I work at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange as a sustainable finance manager. I will share my slides right now so we can maybe deep dive into the topic of the gender-focused bond. So Fiona actually provided a very interesting introduction on the different types of themed sustainable debt instrument that we can use for different impacts. So she spoke about the green, about the social, about the sustainability. And the gender-focused bonds actually are subset, let's say, from the social sustainability and even the sustainability linked bond in the market. As Fiona said, we don't have a separate label, let's say, or an official category nowadays called gender bonds, similar to the green, to the social sustainability and sustainability linked. These are the only 4 official labels that we have in the market. However, under each of this one, we might have different, let's say, sub-themes that a lot of issuers in the capital markets may be referred to when they issue sustainable bonds, when they have like, a dedicated focus on a subject like gender. But how this idea about having a sub-theme or a sub-instrument focused on gender-related matters started? It started in 2021, more or less, when the International Capital Market Association provided to the practitioners in the capital markets these guidelines on using sustainable debt instrument to promote gender equality. So how we can raise funds through thematic bonds to address gender equality or gender inequality in reality aspects. If you look at this document, and you have the link, I believe, in the chat. If you look at this document, you will see that this document is only a guidelines that would provide guiding information for issuers and for investors. So it's not only from the issuer side, but also investors who will invest in these instruments, on how those instruments can provide for gender inequality. And the idea from behind having this kind of guidelines in the market was to promote the use of the thematic bonds, or the sustainable debt instrument, as we call them in the market, for gender-related matters. Now, having said that, and maybe from for the ones of you who have heard a little bit about thematic bonds in general, or sustainable debt instruments, you know that we have 2 big families here. The first family of sustainable bond is the family of the use of proceeds bonds, under which we have the green and the social and the sustainability bonds. And the main, let's say, criteria for this family is that you have to use the proceeds of the bonds, 100% of the proceeds, to dedicated projects or activities like green projects or social projects, or a mix of both. How gender-focused bonds can be used of proceed bonds? Well, if we take a social bond, or if we take a sustainability bond where you have a social aspect in it, and within this social aspect, we can identify a clear use of proceeds for gender-related matters, or for activities or projects contributing to the SDG number 5, then here we can say that this instrument, this financial instrument, potentially can be qualified as a gender-focused bonds. Now, for the ones of you who have worked in this field, you know very well that we differentiate between the intention of the issuers and the real impact of the issuance. The issuers have to say before the issuance, pre-issuance, they have to say what they're intending to do with the use of proceeds and what is the impact they intend to achieve. So at this stage, which is the pre-issuance stage, we can already identify a potential adherence or a potential impact to SDG number 5. So we can already at pre-issuance says we might have in the market a bond who will be gender-focused bonds. However, we all know very well that these instruments have to report post-issuance on an annual basis on the real impact they have achieved. And also here we can go and look at the reporting to make sure that in the reporting, the issuers have reported on a concrete contribution to the SDG number 5. And also here we can say that we have a bond that can be qualified as a gender-focused bond. So in the case, to summarize, in the case of the use of proceeds, you can have a social bond or sustainability bond that can be qualified as a gender-focused bond. And I believe you can see why we call it gender-focused, because we cannot call it gender bond, since there is no category, official category for these instruments. So we call it gender-focused. Now, you don't have to use 100% in this case for gender-related matters. I mean, if you do it, then you will have 100% gender-focused bond, but you can use less than 100% for gender-related, and the remaining will go to other social issues. And this is why it can be gender-focused also, and not 100% fully gender-focused. So this is how we can find gender-focused bonds, or how we can qualify some social and sustainability bonds as gender-focused bonds. And this is within the family of the use of proceeds bonds. However, we have another instrument in the market, and this is the second family that we have, which we call the sustainability-linked bond. And I'm sure that some of you have heard about them. And these are not use of proceeds bond. These are general purposes, let's say, bonds where you as an issuer, you can use the funds or the proceeds from the bonds for general purposes. You are not obliged to use them for green related projects or social related projects. And the link with the sustainability here is that you have to achieve some sustainability targets that you have to put to yourself since the issuance or at issuance of the instrument. And in case you don't achieve these targets, there should be a penalty. Now, how this instrument can be transformed to become a gender-focused SLB? Let's imagine that you have an SLB that you have issued in the market, and you decided that one or more than one of your sustainability targets will be gender-related. So let's, for instance, imagine that you would like to dedicate, if you are a financial institution, if you are a bank issuing an SLB, you will dedicate the funds to increase the number of women, the beneficiaries of your loans, women entrepreneurs, for instance. Or you would like to increase the number of women in your own entity on the managerial level or on the executive board level. Or maybe you would like to increase the number of jobs dedicated to women or to girls in a specific area. So all of these targets that you can put yourself are at the end sustainability targets, as you can see. However, they are dedicated to gender equality or to address gender inequality. In this case, if we have an SLB of this type, then we can also qualify the SLB as a gender-focused SLB. Now, I have to highlight that this, wording that I'm using here, which is the gender focus, is something that we came up with at the Luxembourg Green Exchange, because 2 years ago we had a memorandum of understanding with UN Women to see how capital markets can promote gender-related matters. And when we looked at our database, we found out that we already have some of these instruments listed on the Luxembourg Green Exchange with a clear, targets in the case of SLBs, or clear use of proceeds in the case of the use of proceeds, a clear, link to gender-related. So we said, okay, these instruments that we have already listed on our markets, we can maybe tag them. We can give them a different tag on our green platform to make them much more visible actually for investors and for other issuers to follow the same example. So we came up actually with this kind of tagging, and we came up with this type, let's say, of explanation of what is a gender-focused bonds to use it on our markets. So this is not something that you have in the market as delivered by the ICMA or delivered by IFC, but it's a new tagging that we came up with at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. I will stop talking about theory. Let's go to have concrete examples to better understand actually what do we mean by a use of proceeds gender-focused bonds or an SLB gender-focused bonds. Here we have an example coming actually from a bank in Tanzania, in Africa, NMB Bank, who issued 100% gender-focused bonds 2 years ago. And that was the very first actually gender-focused bond issued by sub-Saharan financial entity in Africa. Fiona, maybe if you don't mind, you have better access to the video that we can share with the participants. If you don't mind, maybe playing the video.
Sure, absolutely. Could I ask you just to stop sharing your screen for a second?
Thank you. Absolutely. I will stop sharing this.
Thank you.
It's a commercial bank, universal commercial bank, based in Tanzania, East Africa, that serves retail clients, corporate clients, and government. I'm the treasurer for the bank, so main responsibility really is around mobilizing funds, so liquidity management, foreign exchange risk management, interest risk management, and coordination, just to make sure that there's balance sheet optimization and as well as capital allocation. So our gender bond really is a use of proceeds bond, that we issued in line with the international capital markets principles under the social bonds framework that allows us to raise money from the public and finance, women-owned businesses or enterprises that are dominantly owned by women, or businesses whose products and services actually eventually, service the female. Women proposition is a very important segment for our bank. And yes, we had a very fantastic proposition for women savings, but we realized on the financing side, we need to do something to mobilize additional funding to support growth for women-owned businesses. So we felt it was necessary for us, because a strategic fit for us is really to diversify portfolio. And given the risk profile of women as far as loans is concerned, we realized that the non-performing loans ratio is actually lower than that of the male counterparts. Yes, so the projects we tend to finance, or that we're financing with these, are predominantly female-owned enterprises, and it cuts across different sectors, be it renewable energy, agriculture, health, education, and manufacturing as well. Obviously, it would be interesting that we measure the number of new loans that are issued to MSCs, so micro to medium and small enterprises women. But also it would be interesting for us, and we're doing that, to measure what impact that is having on their social and economic life. So how many jobs are created? Are they growing? Are they not? Are they expanding their businesses? I think those kind of metrics are very important, and it's part of our KPIs in ensuring that these funds actually put to the right use. Indeed, we've issued other types of bonds, retail bonds, corporate bonds. The difference with this gender bond is that the use of proceeds requires a lot of transparency. Investors require that you go back to them to tell them, how these funds have been used. But in addition to that, it has to go in line with, the social bond principles and in line with the international capital markets, principle on social bonds. as opposed to the other bonds that you could simply raise and finance all manner of activities, without accountability to the investors. This requires significant accountability and transparency as far as investors are concerned. It was very well received by investors, domestic investors, and as well as international investors. As a matter of fact, it got 197% oversubscription. So we had significant appetite seeing from international financiers, but as well as domestic retail and corporate investors. I think one obvious one was the misconception, that you have a gender bond in the market, financing women, and therefore there was a perception that perhaps the bond subscribers were meant to be female. And so it requires a lot of effort, marketing efforts, to ensure that the male counterparts actually understood that it's not just for female, but they could also invest to help advance female. So that was a key challenge for us. But the other one is obviously data quality, especially in some of these emerging markets, still remains to be an issue. So you need to capture the right data at onboarding stage becomes very important, because you really get to realize how critical that is when you're doing your impact measurement and reporting. But the other aspect is the opportunities are still huge. The financing gap for female generally is still quite huge, and that is why there's need for us to perhaps also consider scaling up, such insurances, going forward. Yes, just related to the previous question. So we realize we need to do more still, so certainly we need to raise more funding, be it domestically, be it partnering with DFIs or developing financial institutions, to just make sure that we can scale up, that portfolio. The need is there. I think we need to answer a very critical question of affordability, which keeps coming up, and hopefully using things like guarantee schemes from some of these development financial institutions will enable us actually affordably extend credit to female entrepreneurs. I think critical for me, again, back to what I've said, is data, at the onboarding stage. You need to get it right. But at the same time, just ensuring that indeed you have a pipeline sufficient enough to be covered whatever amount of bonds you want to raise, because ultimately investors demand, that level of transparency and accountability to see that these bonds are actually put to the intended use.
Thank you, Fiona, for sharing the video. I think the video speaks on its own about the advantages and the experience that NMB Bank actually went through to issue the gender-focused bonds. And by the way, they have issued a second one, because as you can see on this slide, a little bit of information, detailed information about the very first issuance of NMB gender-focused bond. Maybe one of the main comments that we can look at is the fact that this issuance was oversubscribed, which means that there was much more demand from investors to subscribe, to invest in this instrument than what was the initial amount that the bank wanted to issue. And that led actually the bank to issue another gender-focused bond, well, 1 year, or less than 1 year ago, because of this demand. So this is an example related to the use of proceeds, let's say, gender-focused bonds. We have another example, but this time it's an SLB to promote gender representation within the staff and within the portfolio. And here we have the issuer EQT AB Group. And here we have an issuer who comes from Sweden. And with this issuance of an SLB, the issuer actually put to themselves certain targets, or certain, let's say, sustainability targets, gender-related. And they said that they would like to increase the women investment advisory professionals in the firm to 28% by 2026 versus 21% in 2020, which means they would like to increase actually the number of women in their investment advisory. And there is another actually target, which is the woman independent board members appointed to in certain of the equity portfolio companies should also be increased to 36% by 2026 versus the 21% of 2020. So here we have not only one target that the issuer has put in place, but two gender-related targets, each of them linked to a certain, let's say, a KPI, a key performance indicators that the issuer will monitor year after year to see by 2026 if they will manage to achieve this target or not. If we look at the same, let's say, side of the issuance as we did for the NMB gender-focused bond, also for this one, there was an oversubscription. According to the issuer of the bond, which reflects again the interest from the investors in investing in this type of instruments related or focused on gender equality. Maybe I will stop here for this part of the presentation. If you have any question, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. I will be happy to answer them or to get in touch, and I will be happy definitely to talk to you. Fiona, I'm back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was so helpful to bring some of these concepts to life with that really concrete case study. I'm just checking the question. So what's terms? I'm not sure if that's a question that you can pick up from Myrna there, but they say, what's the terms that we should follow to know if there are right use of social bonds? I think perhaps that's speaking about the guidance and principles side of things, perhaps. I'm not sure if there's anything further that you would add there based on what we shared before.
No, I mean, for me, it's not really clear this question, but I believe, well, the guidance in the market for whatever, like, use of debt instrument are the ICMA principles. So for social bonds, if we would like to make sure that an instrument can be qualified as a social bond, this instrument should follow the 4 principles of the ICMA, and this is similar to green bonds, similar to sustainability bonds. And for the sustainability linked bonds, it should follow the 5 principles, let's say, for the SLBs. And these are quite clear from ICMA principle.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And I can see that Rahit also shared the same point. I'm not sure, Landon, if you might be able to also share the link to that resource in the chat as well at some point. But really appreciate that that clarification, Paul, and thank you so much for your presentation. Brilliant. So thank you for that. So I have a short amount more to cover now from our side before we take our quick midway break during the session. So we'll wrap up this unit now, really, and talk a bit more about how we can see gender equality themed products being promoted in the market more generally. So at the SSE, we did an assessment of how exchanges are working with their markets to enhance gender equality as part of our guidance for exchanges on this topic. And we found that there are 2 main ways that markets are working to promote gender equality. So that's either through the promotion of participation and the promotion of impact. So let's go through both of those concepts briefly. So by promoting participation, we mean on both sides of supply and buy side, we see that the application of a gender lens in global markets is really helping to access unserved segments. So on the sell side, we see markets promoting and supporting women-led businesses or female entrepreneurs. For example, Sourcing to Equal is an IFC-led initiative in partnership with in partnership with Women's Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative and Norway that aims to connect 5,000 women entrepreneurs to new markets via corporate procurement. And on the buy side, we can see that investment in and supporting of women traders as well. So this relates back to what we discussed earlier regarding the different gender lens investment strategies as being both not just at the portfolio level, but also within the investment firm. And this is because it's been well documented that all male investment firms indeed invest in fewer women-led businesses. And one example of this type of promotion is an annual women-focused investment summit that's run by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which is called the JSE She Invests Summit. In addition to providing a networking opportunity, this event covers a variety of topics, including financial and investment literacy, and showcasing different ways in which women can invest in the market. And then if we look at the second side of the equation that we saw in terms of where things are being promoted, we saw impact. And we saw in our study that exchanges and markets promote financial products and companies based on their impact or their ability to actually improve gender equality within an organization or in society more broadly. And here we're seeing markets raise awareness of financial products and promote listed products through awards or incentives, with the objective of sharing and shining a spotlight on those that are having a positive impact. And we can also see markets creating segments or indices that aim to make it easier to find and invest in these high impact stocks or financial products. And so I think it's also important to note that one index can indeed vary from the next. So as you can see here, and we've heard already, in order to truly capture the holistic picture, which we know from our session earlier in the week is important, we need to look at this topic from many different perspectives. So this would, of course, only, for example, if these indices were only collecting data on women on boards, this would only let us know one aspect of gender equality within a company. In some instances, this is what we want to know, but if we're investing with the objective of either directing capital towards companies that enhance gender equality, or because we understand the value of enhanced gender equality, then we'll want much more breadth of data to really support an understanding of that impact. However, what you will notice is that the categories of information are overall quite similar. It's just the depth, perhaps, of analysis that may go into different indices to support this. And so as we learned last time in our session, sometimes we can think we're actually solving a problem, but may unfortunately be making it worse if we don't understand the underlying data correctly. And so the best way that we can really prevent this is to thoroughly understand what's happening in our organization. And this is where looking to the criteria that are built into these indices may be a helpful tool for you internally within your organization as well. So we'll close out this section with a quick Zoom poll, just to get a sense from you of these options and what you think are the right approaches. So I'll just launch this poll for you now. So the question here is, why do you think investors might be looking for gender-related opportunities? Are they looking for higher financial performance, to access untapped markets, to enhance climate-related impact of investments, to prevent men from accessing leadership positions, or to diversify their portfolios? And you can select multiple answers here depending on which you think might be correct. So I'll just give you all a second to respond to that. I see your answers coming in quickly, so that's great. Okay. Give you a few more seconds to respond, and I'll close the poll. Oh, I see a flurry of responses. I'll close the poll there, and we'll have a little look at the results. So as most of you guessed, that's exactly right. So the top three and the final option are all indeed correct options for why investors might be looking at this and what some of the benefits are. They're kind of concepts, obviously, that we've covered at different points. So while gender-based investing can often be seen as a zero-sum game that might be preventing men from moving forward so that women can instead, of course, gender lens investing is not meant for this. And if this is the outcome, then it's not being done correctly. So it's about really emphasizing those other values that we can get from gender lens investing as well as the social impact it brings. Okay, excellent. So I'll stop sharing that poll now. And that brings us to the end of this section and our short midway break. So as we did yesterday, we'll take a 5-minute break just to refresh. If you do have any questions that you might have thought of so far, please feel free to share those with us so that we can answer those later in the session. But otherwise, we'll start again in 5 minutes time on the timer. So I'll just set that going and we'll see you then. Thanks.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had the chance to grab a cup of tea or stretch your legs a little bit. So we'll get started again. So now that we've had a chance to look at some of the financial instruments available to promote gender equality, let's have a look at how an organization can communicate their performance on gender equality, which could be one means of accessing these gender-specific financing mechanisms. However, this is not only important for communicating with investors your impact, but also internal communication is key to ensure that culture change that we've repeated many times yesterday and today as a necessary aspect of performance actually takes place. So our final unit of this training, which is broken up into two main sections, we'll talk about both communication and transparency within an organization, among its employees, as well as with external stakeholders. To start with, let's look at how you can manage effective internal communication. While there are many methods used to enhance transparency within an organization, what we want to highlight today is the Gender Equality Action Plan as a tool for communicating with internal stakeholders. To guide us on this, our colleague at UN Women, Maya, who you met yesterday, will discuss how the WEPs can be used in action for this purpose. I'll turn it over to you, Maya.
Thank you so much, Landon. So in this session, I will present a way to use the WEPs to advance gender equality and women's empowerment through developing an effective gender action plan, which leads a company's gender equality journey by being communicative and transparent as well. So a gender action plan is really a roadmap for implementing gender equality and women's empowerment. It helps companies embed gender equality into its business model and also contains a coalition of goals, indicators, and targets. And as a result, the company will be more efficiently and successfully advancing gender equality and women's empowerment. And the basic idea of the Gender Action Plan is that the company corrects its past and present forms of inequality, prevents any future reoccurrence of discrimination and bias, ensures that all company strategies, policies, programs, and activities are gender responsive and transformative, and also develop or deepen the understanding of gender equality among all its stakeholders within and outside the organization, as well as tracking progress in real time to assess where you stand on gender equality. And the Gender Action Plan must include clear goals and targets, take into consideration findings from surveys and interviews with key stakeholders, as well as HR data. You should also consider risks, challenges, and opportunities that may occur during the implementation process and include concrete and measurable actions. But how do we create this effective gender action plan? So you need to identify objectives that align with your company's vision using the 7 WEPs principles as a guide. Then planning a concrete measure and actions to achieve those goals. And the WEPs resources offer this step-by-step guide for this stage. You need to gather data to assess your starting point for an inclusive workplace. You need to review your current recruitment policies. Are the job titles gender neutral? Does the language avoid gender bias? And for an inclusive supply chain, you need to check your procurement policies. Do you prioritize women-owned businesses or gender-responsive businesses within the value chain, for example? And then you need to differentiate between broader goals and the specific targets. So a goal defines the objective, while a target is a measurable indicator. So for example, if your goal is to create an inclusive workplace, a target could be to have 40% of women representation in senior management. So if focusing on the supply chain, you could set a target to procure from a specific number of gender responsive companies. And you should aim for ambitious yet achievable targets within a set time frame. And the last step is to assign accountability by appointing a responsible owner of the process to monitor progress and also reporting on the outcomes. And Here is the webs in action. So you need to make sure that your goals have clear and measurable outcomes and evaluate if the goal is actually realistically achievable within the given resources and constraint that you have. And you also need to assess how important the goal is to your organization. Is it relevant according to internal stakeholders, especially middle management? From experience across multiple different companies, there's often a gap between senior and middle management priorities. So this is important as well, that it's well-grounded and that you all agree within the company what are your priorities. And that way you will be the most successful. You also need to set a clear timeline for reaching the goal. And for that, it's important to consult in-house through surveys, group meetings, and consultations, for example. And some recommended actions is to secure the CEO commitment and leadership, and form a diverse team to drive gender equality within your company, and then to integrate gender equality into your business model, and to align the goal with your company's value proposition and vision as well, and to develop targeted questions for stakeholder consultations to identify gaps and opportunities. And finally, set deadlines to finalize and present the action plan to the CEO and the executive team. Sorry, just making sure that we're on the right slide here. So once your gender action plan is finalized, regular communication with employees and stakeholders is really essential. You need to ensure everyone is aware of the plan, the related activities, and the progress being made. And you should also gather the data on progress and to share updates through internal and external channels, such as annual corporate and sustainability reports. So to set effective target indicators, you can use the WEP's Transparency and Accountability Framework, where we offer over 70 indicators tailored to your goals, eliminating the need to create new ones from scratch. So the content presented today is from the WEP's learning module on creating a gender action plan. And you can access this module and additional resources, including a gender action plan template at weps.org/learn. I will put everything in the chat, and thank you so much for your time. I really look forward to the impact that you will make. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Maya. Okay, wonderful. So now that we've covered communicating to internal stakeholders, let's move on to communicating to external stakeholders. And to kick this off, let's do a quick poll to see how your organizations are currently disclosing gender-related information. So as you're filling in this question, does your company disclose gender-related information through one or more of these mechanisms? Let us know in the chat, what do you think determines where gender-related information should appear? What factor are you looking for to decide if, for example, info should appear in an annual financial reporting package, perhaps using the ISSB new IFRS sustainability disclosure standards, or instead in a sustainability report, perhaps using the GRI standards. So feel free now to fill in that Zoom poll, as well share any reflections or thoughts you might have or rationale in the chat as well. Okay, I see a lot of folks saying CSR, ESG sustainability report, about 55% there, a lot in second, the annual financial report, and then about 25% noting they're not sure. And if you're not sure, definitely feel free to reach out to a colleague or someone on a team who may know, and see where this information is being disclosed. So we'll end the poll there. And yeah, as mentioned, you can see the results now, but a lot in the sustainability report, annual financial report, and some noting the gender pay gap report. So who you communicate to defines where you report and what standard you'll use. So to report to investors, the primary location for your gender-related disclosures will be in your annual report. The International Sustainability Standards Board has consolidated the major investor-oriented sustainability disclosure standards, and for reporting to other stakeholders, you might want to use the GRI standards, which are widely used by organizations globally. Together, these can form a holistic reporting package to a wide range of stakeholders. Now, in terms of the content for each type of audiences, for investors, you might focus your disclosure on financially material risks and opportunities related to gender equality, as well as any other information that can help investors in their investment decisions and engagement with the company. As I said, this goes into an annual report alongside your financial statements and other disclosures. To communicate to a broader stakeholder group, you'd report more about the impact of your business on the environment, society, and economy at large, as this will be more in line with what they want to know. At the same time, this information will also be useful to some of your investors, and it will support the information you reported in your annual financial report. To report to your investors in the annual financial report, the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards requires your organizations to disclose 4 broad areas, which you may already recognize if you're familiar with the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD. The ISSB S1 standard requires an entity to disclose information about all sustainability-related risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the entity's cash flows, its access to finance, or cost of capital over the short, medium, or long term. Now, while the ISSB doesn't yet provide specific metrics or disclosure requirements on gender equality, it does highlight that companies should make use of the SASB standards and GRI standards to identify appropriate disclosures for sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Looking at multi-stakeholder reporting, we went through GRI standards and identified those that most directly address gender equality to help you to know where to find guidance on gender equality disclosures for your sustainability reports. So gender-related disclosures are part of disclosures on employees, broken down by gender and region, governance structure and composition, policy commitments, and approach to stakeholder engagement. As you can see, the references to the particular sections of the GRI2 standard on the slide here, and you can find further information on these disclosures. So while GRI is currently under a transition to the new modular standards, we can also take some guidelines from the previous 2016 standards. Although the sectoral and topical standards are still being updated, they still have a lot of value to them. If you look at the reporting requirements for both GRI 405, which is on diversity and equal opportunity, and GRI 406 on non-discrimination, we see a few additional guidelines on disclosure of gender-related information. In both of these guidelines, it's recommended that the reporting organization shall report its management approach for diversity and equal opportunity using GRI 103 management approach. GRI 202-1 also requires you to disclose ratios of standard entry-level wage by gender compared to local minimum wage. Now that we've had a look at the standards, we have a few real-world examples to see what this looks like in practice. These examples are just excerpts from actual reports, so they only present a piece of the full picture. These are examples of current practice, and we are not passing judgment on them as to whether they're good or bad practices. First, let's look at this governance disclosure from the annual report of Airtel, a Nigerian telecommunications company. In line with IFRS sustainability disclosure standards requirements, they reported about the processes they use to monitor, manage, and oversee their sustainability-related performance. They noted that the non-financial performance KPIs linked to their sustainability strategy include gender diversity. They also noted that these KPIs are linked to the board's remuneration, which is a pretty strong incentive to take this seriously. Our second example is on strategy. So strategy disclosures aim to help the readers of your report to understand your strategy for managing sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Here we see the latest annual report of Astra International, an Indonesian conglomerate. Astra International outlines the importance of the diversity of its employees to its success. Importantly, this statement is then backed up by a roadmap. You see that on the right-hand side, and other actions to manage the opportunity they see through a gender diverse workforce. In other parts of the report, Astra International goes into further details about how the company is implementing this, for example, through programs to make the workplace more suitable to women, and through a woman development program, which prepares women leaders for higher positions in the firm. Interestingly, they say that human capital development in 2022 covers 3 focus areas, which are to build an agile organization, develop passionate and energetic leaders so as to be able to navigate the organization in facing business challenges, as well as carry out the culture of continuous improvement and innovation to maintain Astra's relevancy in the era of disruptions. Now, in other words, Astra International stated that a more diverse and gender equal business can help to maintain the company's relevancy in an era of disruptions. So this is an interesting insight into their strategic approach to gender equality. Our next example is on disclosure and risk management. So for an example of this risk management disclosure, we'll look at Coca-Cola HBC's annual report. As a reminder, risk management disclosures are intended to help the reader of the report to understand your processes to identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Coca-Cola HBC provided an overview of how they go about identifying material risks, saying here that to assess inward impacts, we use our annual materiality survey, but also investor-driven frameworks such as the Sustainability Accounting Standard Boards, or SASB, insights from regular calls with investors, our risk management process, including climate scenario analysis, and input from our markets and business units. Our assessment of material outward impacts is presented in the horizontal axis of the materiality matrix and in the 2022 GRI content index. So you can see that axis and index on the left-hand slide. There we go. So next we have a disclosure example on metrics and targets used by Cemex, a Mexican multinational cement company. Cemex also stated in its annual report that it's a signatory to the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, which we discussed yesterday and today, and the UN Global Compact's target gender equality. In this example, we see Cemex updating on the progress made towards gender equality in its workforce. So Cemex is an industry that's been traditionally male-dominated, and therefore it's starting from a lower percentage of women than perhaps a company from some other industries. This example does, however, show that any business can take action towards gender equality. Cemex also set a new goal to increase the representation of women in senior management positions. It specified its base year of 2022, its target 30%, and the target year of 2030. Later on in the report, they also report on metrics such as percentage of workforce by gender, percentage of female employees by position, and woman to men remuneration ratio by region. In addition to the standards we just discussed, there's additional organizations that you can look to for more guidance on this topic, and this is something the UNSSE will be releasing a report on soon. There's also guiding principles for you to consider, such as the UN Charter of Human Rights, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, or the UN WEPs, which we've discussed. In addition, it's also important to note what disclosures are required of your organization by law. Beyond this, there's also a number of rankings or benchmarks to consider, such as the World Benchmarking Alliance. There's also a number of indices and rating agencies that take into account the social performance of companies, such as the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index that we heard about from Harry in the last session. Finally, there's management standards that your organization may wish to adopt, which can help enhance your organization's performance on gender. You can have a look, for example, at ISO 26000, Guidance on Social Responsibility. So gender equality is also present in many other ISO standards. There's also the SDG impact standards, which are management practice standards designed to guide businesses and investors to embed sustainability into their decision-making approach. So this provides an overview of some of the disclosure guidelines you can consider, but previously we also talked about standards and certifications that can be used to develop gender equality practices and disclosures. With that, we're very happy now to have David Pritchard here from the EDGE Certified Foundation to tell us a bit more about this. So thank you so much for joining us, David, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Hi, Landon. Team, thanks very much for the invitation. I have prepared some slides that I can take you through a little bit, demystify a little bit what the EDGE certification is about, and give you a short 10-minute overview of the EDGE certification framework. Just share my slides. Can you see these okay? Let me know if there's any difficulty. EDGE certification, yeah, EDGE certification. Just to start off, it's a global standard. For those who haven't heard of it, it's a global standard for measuring and independently certifying an organization's performance in gender equality in the workplace. It's a framework which is uniquely and very deeply and holistically focused on a workplace gender approach. It helps organizations identify the underlying factors that drive a specific picture of talent management and career progression disaggregated by gender within their organization. So very focused, laser focused on the talent management side of things and the career progression and creating equitable pathways for career progression. It represents a very tangible internal management solution. It's not a reporting standard, it's not a reporting framework, it's an internal management solution that works in a complementary way to some of the other frameworks that you've heard about that have been profiled here, such as the UN Women's Empowerment Principles that Maya just presented to you, such as the reporting standards, the GRI, the ISSB, or the EU CSRD, which many of you will align to, or methodologies which underpin some of the ESG indices, so the assessment methodologies that are being used, such as those from S&P Global, which support the Dow Jones Sustainability Indexes, the Bloomberg ones, for example, Equileap's assessment methodology. They all have common metrics around the talent management, leadership, and some of those elements. Let me go into the framework a little bit and what that looks like. So you have, what does EDGE measure? EDGE measures 4 things. It measures representation, representation at different levels of hierarchy within an organization, representation across different job types, different job functions. It measures it very deeply in an organization. However many levels of hierarchy there are in an organization, we can measure representation at those levels and across different job types as in a matrix kind of process. It measures representation in many different factors, not just in terms of number of employees, but it looks at this in terms of leadership training, it looks at terms of mentorship, it looks at terms of career progression, of performance evaluations, of parental leave, and many such data elements. We look at pay equity. We run a regression analysis, a statistical analysis on pay equity to understand the unexplained gender pay gap, to factor in some of the elements which are common to explaining gaps in pay. We accommodate those, and then we extract the unexplained gender pay gap. We look at the effectiveness of policies and practices. So we're looking here at the equitable career flows, which support a certain dynamic within an organization, the architecture, if you like, of the organization to support equitable career flows. And then finally, we look at the inclusiveness of the culture. We do this by measuring employees' perceptions and employees' experience. So what we're really doing within the EDGE system is we're looking at three sources of information: the data, the policies, practices, and the survey and experiences of an organization. And we do these things within the same 5 core areas, and we triangulate the results so that the organization can understand the different gaps they might have between what they say they do and what the employees understand that they're doing, or what they say they do and what the data is actually showing as a sort of a lagged metric. They can understand really the underlying factors which drive a specific dynamic. What we also do then, we run this analysis over a 12-month reference period to be able to forecast the likely outcome if an organization continues to operate within the same level of recruitment, promotion, between women and men in an organization, what that their representation might look like in 3, 5, 10 years' time, to understand where they might need to make changes to see a more equitable career balance within their organization. There's 3 levels of performance, if you like, which are certifiable by independent third-party auditors. We use 3 auditors: SGS, Intertek, and FlowCert, and they are the ones which are responsible for providing the certificates to the organizations. The EDGE Assess level, there's no barriers to entry to the system, so it's not there's no hurdle, if you like, to reach before being EDGE certified. The EDGE Assess level recognizes commitment, so as long as an organization dutifully goes through the full EDGE analysis, they will be certified at the EDGE Assess level unless they reach certain performance criteria and thresholds to become the EDGE Move or the EDGE Lead level of certification. We also have a certification for gender and intersectional equity, which looks at gender in intersection with other dimensions of diversity rather than just those dimensions of diversity. Just got a couple of examples that I'll just show you just briefly. The first example looks at a larger organization in the energy industry, which had an issue of a very historically male-represented, highly male-represented management team, and wanted to look at ways of understanding how they could change their infrastructure and change the perceptions of the organization and apply certain practices to over the 2 to 4 year period, see some change in the numbers. And these are the numbers. It's very small on your screen, but you'll see that they had representation numbers at different levels of management below what we would see as 30% as an optimal level for that organization, and how they actually performed 4 years later in applying applying an action plan, focusing in areas of pay equity, recruitment, promotion, leadership development, training, mentorship, etc., where they were able to see that progression. The second organization, very typical, more of a medium-sized organization in the financial services sector. They had very low maturity on some of their policies and practices with regard to equitable career flows. They felt that they were doing a fairly good job, but they didn't have very formalized policies and practices in certain domains. So they started to apply those aligned to the assessment methodology of the EDGE certification, and then were able to see the progression in their performance score, which also translated to a higher perception and a better employee experience in understanding that the organization was actually doing something in these areas. And the women employees especially had higher perception scores than they did at the start of the assessment process. So that's a little bit two examples. And just to close it out, just a sort of a logo circle, you see that it is a standard or an assessment methodology, which is a one size fits all. We don't have any specific standard. It's a global standard which is applicable to all sectors, all geographies, and all sizes of organizations, so that an organization can benchmark itself against the standards over time and against peers within their sector or peers within their geography to get a sense of averages and where they stand compared to others in their industry. But I'll leave there, and if you have any questions, happy to take any.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Appreciate that overview. If you don't mind, we just have one or two questions from our side that might help as well with the participants. So I was curious, which aspect of the certification process do organizations tend to find the most challenging or difficult, and why do you think this might be?
That's a good question. The most challenging aspect is the holistic nature of it. So it's the amount of data and information that we are asking an organization to actually gather, and to gather that information disaggregated by gender within 5 or 6 levels of responsibility and across 3 different job types. So we look across job types, we look at support functions, we look at core functions, and we look at core functions within an organization with profit and loss responsibility. So we really are drilling down to a very granular level. And within all of those areas, we're looking at, as I mentioned, the data on, it could be on pay, it can be on leadership development training, it can be on performance evaluations. So it's an organization that has data ready, it's okay, but many organizations don't have that level of granularity of data. But by getting that, they can really start to understand where they may have gaps in their data or in their performance, which they can then close through a variety of improving perceptions, improving communication, improving policies, improving practices, etc., etc.
That makes a lot of sense. And while you yourself note it's quite a thorough process, you also note, and we couldn't agree more, that filling those gaps is so critical. And a second quick question for you. What has been the most surprising finding you've seen arising from across the over 800 organizations who've obtained the EDGE certification to date? Have there been any unexpected impacts for companies who have worked through that process, for example?
I think, and what's surprising is the very, I mean, we set the bar very high for the EDGE Lead certification. EDGE Lead means meeting all of the indicators within the EDGE system, and there are 18 core indicators, and they're supplemented by sub-indicators, if you like. The core 18 indicators are on our website. You'll be able to find those, but there will see the scoring grid is not in its entirety, because it's a sort of dynamic scoring with some conditions and dependencies. To reach the EDGE Lead is very difficult, but it's very interesting that what's surprising for us a little bit at EDGE is the type of organizations which reach EDGE Lead, and they're very diverse, and they're not necessarily in the most developed markets, in the most developed industries which you would expect to see gender equality in the workplace. We've seen it, for example, in the cement industry in Colombia, reaching all of the EDGE standards and thresholds within their business, and having worked extremely hard to work their way up to that level. We've seen it in the insurance industry in Vietnam, which is fascinating, I think, because that it was from a large multinational, and it was the Vietnamese entity which outperformed all of the other entities within that large insurance organization. So it really is not, I think, the expectation that it's there's an EU regulations about the EU, the companies based in the EU probably outperform all of the others. The way that we look at it, with the experiences and the policies, practices, and the maturity of those and the data, it's quite surprising where an organization can actually end up depending on where they come from.
Okay, very interesting. For any company or organization interested, we have linked the Edge certification. And as a closing out, is there anything else companies or organizations should be aware of in that process or for joining and being Edge certified?
Yeah, as I said, I think it's very complementary to others. I think it's my thinking here, because I'm part of the development of the standards. I don't work directly with the companies themselves. I work with the development of the standards and the evolving development of the methodology. And for us, we are very conscious of the proliferation of standards and frameworks in this area, which I think is confusing to many. But I think it's important to look at and not to compare necessarily, oh, I want to do framework A or framework B or framework C, but rather to look at, what do I want to achieve within the organization, and which framework is best tailored to help me achieve that. And you talked the example of CEMEX earlier on, which is affiliated to the WEPs, a signatory of the WEPs, which is great, but it's also an EDGE certified organization because they really wanted to have this deep dive into their understanding of the career management and career progression perspective from an internal perspective, to know what they needed to change, to improve 1% or 2% in their career critical positions at a certain level of management. And we can sort of minutely dissect that to be able to help them. So I think it's interesting, and it's a lot of proliferation. There's a lot of harmonization of certain metrics across the frameworks, which I think is great. I mean, we're talking with all of the frameworks developers, but each one has their specificities, and I think it's worth looking at that for what an organization is looking to achieve.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And a question for you, and then we'll let you go. How do you monitor compliance with EDGE certification requirements? Is that an annual basis, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't go into too much detail on that. So it's a 2-yearly cycle, and it's done through an independent audit. The independent auditors, so the 3 certification bodies which we work with, which are SGS, Intertek, and FlowCert, undertake an audit on a 2-yearly basis to check compliance against the EDGE standard. So they're the ones that do that. We've outsourced that. We train them to be able to do that independently of the system.
Fantastic. That makes a lot of sense. So thank you again, David, and thank you for answering some of our questions. We really appreciate you joining us.
Excellent.
Excuse me. So as we start to wrap up, I'd ask you to think back a bit on today and our previous session, and we'll have one final Menti for you in a moment to complete and for us to see what you took away from our time together. So we'll give you a second. If you could go back to Menti and fill it in, that would be greatly appreciated. And I'll continue to share some final information for you as you take a look at that Menti. Okay, so give us 1 second. We'll look at some of the answers together, actually. So your current level of comfort on this topic now, it's great to see some pretty high answers there. That's great to see. We do hope that you're at least a little bit more comfortable with this topic now, or that you found some nuggets of information to take away from our time together. Okay, great. And if you could share with us, what is your main takeaway, or what did you learn? Could be just a word or two, or anything that might come to mind. Give you a few seconds here. Okay, gender action plan. It's great to see from WEBs. Definitions, absolutely. Those are always a good starting point to understand a topic a bit better. Financial importance, absolutely. Holistic, yes, for sure. Yeah, and some different things we discussed on equality and equality definitions. I'm glad to see someone mention social bonds, which Paul discussed with us earlier, a bit about gender and different bonds. Okay, great. We'll leave that question there. Okay, perfect. So as we wrap up, there's a number of resources available for you to continue your learning journey. As mentioned, this is a bit of a starting point. We hope you learned something and took a few things away, but there's a lot more to learn and to read about. So we have resources ordered by units that we've gone through. But I'd also like to remind everyone that you can download the handouts, which contain many resources and links to what we've discussed for further information. I also encourage you to stay tuned in to SSE training by subscribing to our newsletter for more relevant training sessions. So all those resources, including our partner and guest speaker slides from today and yesterday, can be found on the SSE website. We'll also post the recordings on our website too, in case you wish to watch them or refer to them later. And I see someone just asked about certificate, which I'll come to now. So we're very grateful for any feedback, or excuse me, hold on. Those are some of the resources we have. So there's a lot of resources that you can refer to and go through in your own time as well. Now, okay, now getting to certificate, which I understand everyone is always keen on. So we are very grateful for your feedback. And as our appreciation, we'll be sending out certificates of participation from the SSE, IFC, UN Women, and Columbia University for all those who complete the feedback survey and have completed yesterday and today's training. So you can access the feedback survey through the link being shared in the chat box, and an automatic email will also be sent with the link 24 hours after this to all participants. And please allow up to 5 working days to receive your certificate, as it does take some time to compile and put together all the certificates. So please be patient. If you haven't received your certificate after over 5 working days, feel free to ping us, but the certificates will be coming, I promise you that. I want to say a big thank you to our speakers, our guest speaker from Luxembourg Stock Exchange, Paul. Always a pleasure to have you and hear more about gender bonds. Very insightful as always. And of course, to our second speaker today, David Pritchett, the Managing Director at Edge. Really interesting to hear more about that Edge certification process. So thank you again for that. As we close out, I want to thank our partners quickly, the IFC, UN Women, Columbia University, and Government of Luxembourg, as well a big thank you to Athens Exchange Group for hosting this training. In closing, thank you again for your time and your fantastic participation. It was great to connect with you all. Again, we hope you learned some helpful new things from our presentation and time together, and we hope to have you join a future training webinar, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks and take care, everyone.